You're watching a production of South Dakota Public Broadcasting.
Welcome to Contours, conversations about issues in agriculture that impact us all. Contours is produced by the South Dakota State University College of Agriculture and Biological Sciences and SDSU Extension. These programs are distributed online through igrow.org.
Hello and welcome to Contours as we continue our open conversation with South Dakota's agricultural leaders and you. I'm Dr. Barry Dunn, Dean of the College of Agriculture and Biological Sciences here at SDSU. In this edition of Contours, we're going to continue our conversation about soil health. Soil is the factory that will help us produce the food the world will need to continue feeding the planet. Let's refresh your memory about the benefits of healthy soil. It keeps valuable nutrients on the land and out of streams, lakes, and water supplies. It helps ensure productive and sustainable agriculture. It traps and stores carbon, helping to ease the effects of climate change. The most effective way to meet food production goals that will feed the growing world population is to improve production on existing ag lands, and we will need healthy soil to accomplish that. So what are some of the ways to improve the health of South Dakota soil? And if we had a soil health checkup in the state, what would be the prognosis? To provide some insight and answers, we welcome back 4 people who are intimately involved in the soil health program in South Dakota. Jeff Zimprich is the Natural Resources Conservation Service State Conservationist for South Dakota. My friend Doug Sieck is the chairman of the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition. Doug also farms and ranches near Selby, South Dakota. Anthony Bly is an SDSU Extension Soil Field Specialist, and Al Miron is a retired agribusinessman who farms near Crooks. Jeff, the NRCS serves not only the farmers of South Dakota, but also all citizens of South Dakota, the people who live in urban areas like Sioux Falls or Rapid City, Aberdeen, Mitchell. So what does a soil health program mean for a community like Sioux Falls, who gets its water, or Mitchell, who gets its water from the rivers of our state?
You bet. It's going to mean overall, most of the time, it's going to mean cleaner water. It's going to mean water that is going to be more sustainable and on a more constant supply. Maybe not too much water when they don't need it, and maybe water when they do need it in dry conditions. It's going to be water that they're probably going to have to spend less dollars on treating, which might actually mean lower water bills and things like that. So I think it's really important for us to think that long term as well. You know, you mentioned the fact that we work for all the citizens of South Dakota. One of those citizens in our state is a little young lady by the name of Paisley, and she happens to be my granddaughter. And I think about Paisley a lot in how will the natural resources of this state be for her when, in 30 years, when she's raising a family? And so I think a lot of these things we have to tie back that long-term view.
Al, you farm near Sioux Falls, South Dakota. You hear about the water quality in the Big Sioux River a lot. I know your farm has been used as a kind of a shining star on the hill for good stewardship. How do you, farming next to a large community like that, what does soil health and the relationship with that urban audience, why is that important for us to discuss and to talk about?
Well, Dr. Dunn, as you know, the Big Sioux River and some of the tributaries, in particular Skunk Creek and Willow Creek, that feed through the river in Sioux Falls, is an impaired waterway. And the city of Sioux Falls is involved in an effort with the Soil Conservation Service to clean up that watershed. And in so doing, they're planting buffer strips or encouraging buffer strips around the rivers and streams. And I commend that effort. That's a good effort. But I also think that if we can stop the water runoff at the top of the hill, we won't have to deal with it at the bottom of the hill. And so through my operation, I'm trying to prevent erosion, stop the water loss, get it to go into the soil, improve my productivity, but at the same time clean up the tributaries to the Big Sioux River. And so I think that is being effective. In addition to that, we want to prevent the runoff because it's economically bad for the farmer to have the nutrients end up in the rivers and streams and down at the Gulf of Mexico. We need to keep those on our land, and that's important to agricultural production.
I think about, people talk about gaining the social license to operate, the social license to farm, and the stewardship ethic that it takes. And I hear that in Doug's voice. And Jeff, talk about what a stewardship ethic, a land ethic means to South Dakota, and why that is important, and why outstanding people like Doug and Al are role models for us.
Well, and maybe in just a second they'll chime in on that, and they'll tell us what it really means to them. From my perspective, really, what it means to me is someone who is looking at the resources that they're borrowing for a short period of time. You know, we have bought land, have inherited land, but it's really truly only ours for a short period of time. And we're looking at those resources, we're trying to decide what's the best use of this land. In other words, how can I treat it in a certain way, maybe with a land use decision that will be sustainable? And then once I've made that land use decision, then how can I do all those things to really maintain it and make it be productive? Not only for now, but into the future. To me, that's stewardship. That's what it's about. And it's about thinking beyond my fence row, beyond my property boundaries.
Doug, you have a reputation as a steward of the land across South Dakota, and certainly in a leadership role now. What is the kind of the genesis of that land ethic, that stewardship ethic that you have? Where did that come from?
It came from my grandfather and my father. You know, that it's handed down to take care of the land and to do what you think is best. You know? And it's interesting how our views on that have changed. Like Al was saying, when we have a large rain event, 25 years ago, I would drive past the fields, and if there was water sitting in the pothole, I would say, good, we had a really good rain. And now I want to drive by that same field, and I want to see that 2 inches infiltrated. You know, it's changed the way we think. Okay? And that's just the tip of the iceberg. You start changing things, and by the way, my neighbors might argue that I'm not the greatest steward of the land because I'm doing some things different. And when you do things different, you open yourself up to criticism. But we're trying to use less pesticides. We're trying to use less fertilizers. We're trying to imitate nature or work with nature more than fight our way against it. If I walk across a well-managed native pasture and I start looking down and counting, I'll see 40 to 60 to 80 different species of plants. I'll see a lot of diversity out there. And I didn't grow up with diversity in my fields. I wanted corn, I wanted wheat, I wanted beans. Whatever was growing, I wanted that to be the only thing out there. And now I'm learning that all these things are tied together. Okay? It's okay to have more than just one plant out there. So in my cropland, I'm trying to emulate the native prairie. I'm trying to have more diversity out there, and I'm trying to get that symbiosis where they work together. And I didn't pick that up from my father and my grandfather. I picked that up from people at NRCS, and I picked that up on other producer tours that I've gone on, like Anthony's putting on. And I've picked that up going to events sponsored by the South Dakota Grassland Coalition that had to do with holistic management. And holistic isn't a scary term. Holistic means looking at the whole picture. And that's what I'm trying to do with managing the soil. I'm trying to look at the whole picture. Yeah, there are some weeds out in that field, and I could go out and I could hit that with a chemical and I could wipe those weeds out. But how does that affect things down the road? Do I need to do that, or can I work around it?
We hear a lot in the soil health discussion about new technologies, new terms for a lot of us in South Dakota, cover crops and no-till and reduced use of herbicides and other pesticides. What in terms of the adoption of the of the whole system, but of the technology related to it, what's kind of held it back, or is it all new to us? What's the history here?
Well, you know, there's wonderful technology. You know, my grandfathers tilled the soil because they had to, and that's the way they made their living and were productive and fed their families. And so technology came, fertilizer being one of them, and herbicides and things. And so really we kind of removed the need to till that soil by gaining that technology, if you think about that. And so, you know, we've seen a big push in no-till in the late 80s and the early 90s, and we've seen a lot of growers get out of that. And things that they battled was that early accumulation of residue and the cool soils that it promoted. And so the crops didn't look as good as the neighbors that did full width tillage. And a very favorite professor of mine, Dr. Beck, says you don't harvest your crops in June. And he's true, because those no-till crops catch up. And they're starting to realize that carbon release when we do that tillage in preparation for crops really is what's causing those crops to look really good along with the temperature, but the no-till tends to lag behind. And other mentors of mine, Dr. Schumacher was really a proponent of that no-till crop will catch up later on. And so a lot of patience is required, and I think a lot of emphasis is put on is that crop needs to look good all the time. And we realize that crop is growing out in the environment, and it gets cool and it gets warm and it gets beat up with rain in the environment, and so we're really looking at the end. And when we look at a lot of those studies, those no-till comparisons with conventional tillage, they're really pretty comparable. And in Al's case, where the soil health really grows, I think they're superior. And hands down, you can't deny that on that long-term investment in no-till and soil health. Those yields are going to improve ahead of the way we do things.
You know, Al, you and I have seen South Dakota over a few decades, and several of them are very, very dry. And so for me to see cover crops growing and expanding the growing season from April to November is foreign to me, because I'm worried about the soil drying out. How has it worked for you? Because you've made it work for a long time now, where you didn't dry your soils out. It actually went in the reverse. But to some of us, that seems kind of counterintuitive.
Well, if we look at what happens there, and it's not just a matter of moisture, but how much do we retain in the land? And so if we can plant a cover crop and therefore have more moisture retained instead of running off, we counteract the use of the moisture by that cover crop. In a lot of cases, we have too much moisture in the springtime, and so the cover crop can help us to dry that out a bit. And so we have to manage that. There are cases in the springtime where it's dry and we would terminate a cover crop early. In other situations where it's particularly wet, we might wait a while to terminate that cover crop. So there's still some management involved in that. But overall, we see really no effect of decreased moisture because of the cover crop and its effect on the subsequent crop.
Doug, well, the bottom line for an awful lot of people is, does it pay? So you have different equipment, you have new crops, you have seed that some of us have never heard of before. Planting turnips in South Dakota is not something that we did outside of our gardens. So does soil health pay, Doug?
Yes, it does, Barry. We've got a little bit of a gap there, a deficiency, where we're not doing a real good job of getting that sort of data to the producers. And this past year, we formed an organization called the South Dakota Soil Health Coalition. And one of our missions is going to be to put together that data. If I get on the computer, and I look around and I keep my ears open, I'm running into producers that have kept really good records, and they're showing increases in yield after using cover crops. And that kind of data needs to be compiled into some kind of form that when we have a field day, we can hand this to the producers when they come in, because the money talks. I mean, we all would like to think that we're great conservationists, and we've done a lot of conservation just because we're conservation-minded people. But at the end of the day, we still have to pay the bills, and the cover crop deal will pay the bills. There are a lot of folks out there that can document that this is increasing your yield. It's not going to do it every time. Okay? And it's not going to do it just because you go in behind wheat and plant a $10 cover crop mix, which is a fine cover crop mix. That's not going to be the silver bullet that saves you. But when you start doing some cover cropping thing and you do a systems approach to it, all of a sudden things start to change. When we started doing no-till, that didn't pop right away either. It took 3, 4, 5 years for things to really go. I mean, it was good right from the start. Like Al said, we started no-tilling corn, and all of a sudden we were raising corn on years when we would have been cutting silage instead of combining corn. It really made a difference. But then after about 5 years, we went to level 2. Okay? And that's the way this cover crop deal is too. You can see some benefit right away. You can start digging up your soil and you can see that cottage cheese look, and you can do the infiltration ring and you can see water starting to run in. But it's after you've committed to it for 3 or 4 years, you really start to see some things changing.
Jeff, how does NRCS help answer that question about does it pay, and to some extent the question I had for Anthony about getting it adopted? How is NRCS helping?
Well, I think there's several ways. You know, a lot of it is just that one-on-one input that we have. I think we call that our basic conservation planning process, where we'll go out and assess natural resources, give some advice, make some recommendations. It's all voluntary, it's up to the producer. I think another thing we do is we connect producers with other producers. So, you know, these gentlemen are here talking and sharing their secrets and their ideas. And, you know, one little simple idea we did just a few years ago is we formed this little volunteer program. We call it Voices, South Dakota Voices for Soil Health. And so just a network of producers who can talk with each other. And I know that there's a lot of value there. I think the other thing is we do everything in a partnership. There's a lot of us that can work together. I think bringing agribusiness into this with science and us at USDA and many of the other folks at USDA could be valuable. And I think the final thing is, I would just emphasize, we've talked about that we say we have quite a few answers. I think there's some things unanswered too. And so there's going to be need for more research and plot work and things like that that are going to help demonstrate, but also maybe figure out some things we don't have all the answers to.
Anthony?
Yeah, well, you know, one thing we've been doing in partnership with NRCS and South Dakota No-Till Association and Soil Health Coalition's getting involved with that now that they've newly been formed is the South Dakota Soil Health Challenge. We've been conducting some soil health meetings around the state, and very popular, a lot of interest in those. And another component was field tours. And we've had some really successful field tours, and you know, the growers really like to go to another producer's field and see what they're doing and what they've experienced and what they would recommend. You know, they have questions, lots of questions. And that's just a wonderful exchange of ideas and experience. You know, experience is kind of the best teacher that way. And that conversation and that information trading is very, very good.
I've noticed in South Dakota about some aspects of this is some real skepticism. Well, it might work in Selby or it might work in Crooks, but it won't work on my farm. Al, you've seen a lot of this state. You've been on lots of operations. Are these kind of foundational principles, Al, or will it just work for you and Doug?
Well, it's funny that you really mentioned that, Dr. Dunn, because when I first started no-tilling, my father said, well, it probably works for you, but it won't work over here. And yet we've farmed in a variety of soils, and I have not seen it not work. That doesn't mean there aren't some problems with it. There are times when the soil is too wet and we have to wait for it to dry out a bit, or times when it's quite cool and the crop may not get off to quite as good a start. But I have not seen it not work because of soil type.
And Jeff, we have very different soils west of the Missouri versus east. One's a glacial soil, one's a less soil, a wind-drifted soil. So do you see these technologies and these principles work across this very diverse state we have?
We are. We're seeing them work across our state, and amazingly, we're seeing it work across the country. Yeah. And we're seeing it work in other countries. So I think that, yes, as Al said, I think there's some things that may have to be different. It's a prescription, right? Mm-hmm. If some of us get sick and we need to get healthy, we may get different advice and prescriptions from our doctor on how to get healthy. But I think the key of it is I think that in general the principles, the idea of emulating Mother Nature a little bit, trying to figure out how she managed the rainfall and the sunshine and the soils of an area and try to emulate that some, I think it can work everywhere.
Al, you mentioned that the Big Sioux is an impaired waterway, and I actually just had a question about that the other day. What does impaired waterway mean? And And maybe Anthony, you could help us understand that a little bit too, because we're a proud people. We're proud of our state and our waterways. Recreation in the summertime is lots about jet skis and so what does an impaired waterway mean, and what's the future if we don't work on that?
Well, Dr. Dunn, I'm certainly not an expert on the government classification there, but they do have different levels of impairment. And in some cases, for example, the Big Sioux is not suitable for total immersion. You can still have some recreational activities and so on, and it'll meet the requirements for those things, but it may not meet the requirements for swimming and some of the other activities that we would like to have in a waterway such as the Big Sioux. Primarily because of the fecal coliform. There also would be some problems with sedimentation and so on.
Jeff would probably be on, he can affirm that, but it's fecal coliform as well as the sediments.
And I think one way to look at it is our waters across our state have been assigned designated uses, ways that we'd want to use that water. And we may want to use different waters different ways. And then they've set up some standards under those designated uses to measure and look for certain things. So an impaired water is really saying in a way is that there was a use that we would like this water to be able to provide, and for some criteria, for some reason, it's not meeting that use. So it's impaired for that use. And then it's like trying to solve it. And the exciting thing of it is a lot of partners are working on some of those issues above Sioux Falls, and we're seeing positive change, and that's exciting.
Well, it's an important aspect in our economy too. Tourism is at an all-time high this year. There's an awful lot of interest in using the natural resources of our state, and I think it's really important that certainly the landowners, the farmers, and the ranchers take responsibility for the management of some of those. Doug, I get back to the livestock part because I was a cattle guy for most of my life, and certainly near and dear to my heart. But the cattle industry's changed a lot in the last since I was ranching, and prices are very, very high. Is there a potential for the livestock industries of South Dakota to grow as the interest in soil health grows?
There really is. Back when the commodity prices, when the corn prices were high, the idea of putting a full season cover crop out on that field, you just couldn't pencil it out. It was like, I can't give up all that profit. Now the corn deal has backed off a little bit. The cattle deal is still really strong. We can make a lot better calculation when we're calculating out, should I graze that down the road? Okay, we're seeing that with the different way we manage the cattle now too. We used to just turn the cattle into the whole pasture, leave them there the whole season. Now we're doing this intensive managed grazing. A lot of people are rotating in one form or another, and we're doing things where we get out there and we work on that plant, and then we move off and we let it rest and regenerate. And we're seeing systems like that increase our productivity by maybe 30%, maybe 50%. And it's just by managing those cattle, managing the time. We used to think overgrazing was a factor of how short we'd chewed the grass down, and we're learning that overgrazing is more a factor of time. How long did you leave them in there? The grass starts growing back in 3 to 5 days. Put them in this piece, get them in there, take advantage of the grass, increase your efficiency as far as harvesting that grass, then get out of there and let it rest. We're moving to cattle. When I got out of college at SDSU back in the 80s, I was going to beef meetings where they were schooling us in how to make our cattle bigger. They were telling us about frame scores and how to jump to when you buy a bull so you get bigger cows. Now we're seeing that going the other way. We're trying to get more efficient cattle just like we're trying to get more efficient crops. The whole dynamic is changing, and the cattle play a vital role out there. We're stimulating the soil whenever we've got those cattle out there, and we can do just as much improvement to the rangeland by managing the time and the effect of those cattle as we can to the cropland when we manage the cover crops and use no-till. Both of them have so much potential. When I was a kid, if we got 25 bushel wheat, that was a tremendous wheat crop. Okay? Now, you got to be up to 70, 80, 90 bushel wheat before you can get a tremendous wheat crop. Let's do the same thing with the cattle. Okay? Instead of it taking 8 acres to take that cow over the summer, let's do better than that. Let's do 6. Let's do 5. Let's manage those cattle and let's make this deal work.
Al, as a farmer who primarily now is into the grain side of it, are you able to incorporate livestock grazing into the crop residues?
It's a little bit more difficult, but yes, we're able to do that, and I do it by letting other people graze my crop residue.
You know, as I think about Jeff's granddaughter and Paisley and communities like Selby, Doug, what will Selby look like 30 years from now? What will rural South Dakota look like? How are you going to paint that vision for us as citizens of South Dakota? What would you like to see in Selby in 30 years?
I'd like to see the small businesses still flourishing. I'd like to see the big businesses delivering the products to us that they need to. I'd like to see them taking the products away from they need to. But I also want to see these small businesses survive and thrive. I want to see the farms diversify. Okay? I want to see us move away from monocultures. I want to see us moving away from relying so heavily on pesticides and commercial fertilizers. They're good products, but they're like sharp knives. Let's not go out there and slash the whole environment with them. Let's manage the inputs like Jeff said. Let's emulate nature. Okay? And let's see people working together. 25, 30 years ago up in Selby, I heard you talking to a group of people, and you were telling us that everybody can win. You don't have to do better than your neighbor to feel good. You don't have to have bigger calves than he does. You don't have to have better corn. You can help each other both produce better products. I'd like to see us working together more, and I'd like to see us competing less.
Jeff, you're a leader in the state and travel it extensively. You know, describe Paisley's future for us here in South Dakota. You grew up in South Dakota, you came back to us, and we're certainly glad you did. So what does that world look like for your granddaughter?
Well, I think Doug did an excellent job of describing it, and that's a lot of the same ways that I have viewed it. And I guess, you know, when I've thought about it many times, I've thought that what I never want to have happen is where I have Paisley on my knee or she's standing beside me and she'd say, "Grandpa, I thought that you were involved in conservation, and why is our soil not good, or why is this water not clean?" So I guess in my vision, it's just all of us working together and we're solving these problems. They're not all easy answers, but I know we can get to them.
Yeah. Anthony, the science will continue, certainly. As a scientist, what's on the future? What's in the future for us?
Well, with 2 degrees at SDSU, I was trained as an agronomist and very good educations. And lately I've considered myself as an inorganic agronomist. You know, we're good at soil testing for those inorganic nutrients. And I realize that there's a whole biological side of this thing that we probably should become attuned to. And there's some biological soil testing going on, and I think that's the new horizon as far as soil testing is going. And looking at those comparisons and things are going to be very important.
How about it, Al? What's in the future for your farm? What do you see down the future?
Well, I hope that it can be a bright future. I think we need to think about what's going to happen to not only ourselves, but our children, our grandchildren, and their grandchildren. And I think we're on the right track there to have a healthy soil so that we can have good production and able to feed the world down the road.
We hope these discussions over the past 2 episodes have stirred your interest in soil health so that you want to learn more. If you do, you can find more about it on our iGrow website, igrow.org. We also have set up some links on our website to connect you to more information from the USDA NRCS and the Soil Health Coalition of South Dakota. I'd like to especially thank our guests today for providing insight, information, and inspiration. Thanks to Jeff Zimprich, Doug Sieck, Anthony Bly, and my friend Al Miron. Thanks for joining us for this edition of Contours.
Contours is a conversation about issues in agriculture that impact us all. These programs are produced by the South Dakota State University College of Agriculture and Biological Sciences and SDSU Extension. You can watch these programs on your local South Dakota Public Broadcasting station or by going online to igrow.org.